Okay, good. So today, what I'd like to do is briefly to go over the malachos, the labors that are forbidden in Shmittah, okay? And then to speak about some of the practical implications for watering your garden, for example, or some other practical implications. There are also malachos that are permitted to do on Shmittah, and I'll try to cover some of that today, but we'll see how much time we have. But yeah, Shmittah, we still have a while, so we have a few weeks, different ground that we need to cover. We also need to speak about Hefka, of course. What do you do if you have fruit trees and so on? What kind of a sign do you have to place outside? Do you have to allow people in? What about if it's dangerous? Blah, blah. So we need to speak about that also. Potted plant is an excellent issue. I'm not going to get to it this week because it's a whole issue in itself. But potted plants we will speak about, absolutely. It's on the list. And then, at the end, when we finish all of these, we can speak about questions of money, of loans, and so on. But that there's time for. All right. So if you look at the pasuk in Vayikra, okay, the second pasuk on this source sheet. So it says, okay, let's see pasuk Gimel. Okay, Sheishanim tizra sodecha. Okay, you're allowed to plant your field for 6 years. You're allowed to prune your vineyard, right? And you'll gather its produce. And then on the 7th year, it should be a sabbatical year for Hashem, right? Shabbos la Hashem. And then what are you not allowed to do? You're not allowed to plant your field. So we have planting over here, okay? Well, what kind of planting is this? What? Excellent. Excellent. So what do you think that this pasuk is talking about?
Food.
Produce. Grain. Sadcha, it's planting your field. It's not fruit trees. This is speaking about planting your fields, right? Sadcha lo tizra. The karmacha and your vineyard lo tizmar. You mustn't prune. And then esfiach ketzircha lo tigzar. That which your harvest produces, you mustn't harvest. Whereas in nizracha lo tivzar, right? And you mustn't again harvest, pluck. What's the word for a vine? I'm sure there's a good word. Tivtzol, exactly, right? Shna Shabbosain yellow oret. So we see in the pasuk mentions a set of labors that are prohibited, forbidden during the Shmittah year. We have planting a field, we have pruning a vine, and then we have harvesting. Okay, and these are going to be the basic elements of Shmittah. Okay, these malachos. It doesn't say watering, right? It doesn't say fertilizing. Thank you. It doesn't say plowing. Okay, there's a lot which is absent from here.
My garden is plants. They're not food. They're just, that's nice to look at.
Right. What about plants that are nice to look at, like flowers? Okay. Tend to your flowers on the Shmittah year. We'll see about that also later. Good question. So now let's see. Let's see how this goes from the. You're good? Are we good? You're not happy? Oh, okay. I'm not. I'm good.
No.
Okay. So let's see the Rambam. Okay, we've got, you see our source sheet for this week, the first the first source sheet. Excuse me. Mitzvahs Aseh, says the Rambam. David, you want to read the Rambam? Now that's a very adventurous pasuk that the Rambam is bringing. Where is that pasuk? Who knows? It's in Shmos. It's in Pfeffer Shmot, and over there it's speaking about Shabbos, right? It says, "Sheshet yamim ta'avod, ubashvi'it tishbot, becharish uvakatzir tishbot." That's what the pasuk there says. And then there's a question of what this charish and katzir is speaking about. Is it speaking about Shabbos, which it seems to be, or why should it mention this about Shabbos? There are many things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. So maybe this is speaking about Shmittah. And this is related to a Gemara, the way the Gemara darshans it. I'm going to skip that discussion, but it's an interesting discussion in the Rambam. The Rambam mentions this pasuk in the context of Shmittah. David, take it away. So this is a fascinating Rambam, right? The Rambam says, Kol ha'oseh melacha me'avodat ha'aretz. Sounds like from the Rambam, whatever you do, any kind of avodas ha'aretz, any kind of labor on the land is considered a full Torah prohibition. And this, like we'll see, is very much not simple. The Rambam seems to understand that what the pasuk speaks about, the specific malachos, the specific labors that the pasuk mentions, are examples. Okay. However, they're not exhaustive. Okay, they're only examples. Okay, let's skip the next two sources because they're nice, but they're bonus sources. So we'll skip them, even though David's busy reading them. But they speak about why the Rambam brings this extra pasuk, which I do think is a very interesting point. However, let's go straight on to the Gemara, because the Gemara is the main source of how do we divide the labors of Shmittah. D'oraisa level, meaning Torah prohibitions, and D'Rabbanan level. And this is vital, because the D'Rabbanan level, we'll see, is mutter, is permitted under certain circumstances. The D'oraisa level, generally speaking, is not permitted, even under those special circumstances, which we'll discuss later. Yes. The questions. Oh, that's very annoying. So I should read. Right. I don't especially want to read because I'm a little bit under the weather, and I have to save my voice for Shabbat. Yeah, just David, you can turn up as long as Abby's not worried about waking up the kids or something. Yes. So let's see the Gemara. Okay, this is the fourth. Should have put numbers here. Well, whatever, I forgot. Anyway, the fourth source, which is the Talmud Bavli Maseches Moed Katan. David, loud and clear.
Avos Asher Rachmana told us lo Asher Rachmana. Michdei Zira b'chal Zira v'tzira b'chal Tzira. L'may hilchasa kasvinu Rachmana.
No, l'may hilchasa kasvinu Rachmana, meaning, right, the Torah speaks about these four different labors. Okay, we saw in the pasuk, right? Tzadchalu tizra, sowing, karmachalu tizmar, pruning, and then harvesting. And the Gemara is asking, the Gemara makes an assumption. Avos, right? Only the biggies, the avot malacha, like we have avot malacha on Shabbos, and we have avos for purposes of tort cases, for damages. So also here we have avos, meaning the main melachot. That's what the Torah prohibits. But toldos, which are those that are, as it were, culled from, we extract them from the main melachot, those the Torah does not prohibit. So says the Gemara, well, the Torah mentions zemira, which is pruning. Isn't pruning under the category of sowing, because what's sowing, right? Zriya. Zriya is you're making something grow. Okay, you're putting the seed in the ground in order to make the produce grow. Okay, and why are you pruning? To make it grow, right? You want to make it grow better, to grow more. So says the Gemara, why does the Torah mention also Zriya and also Zmira? And the same thing with Betsira, which is for the vine, and the Ktsira, which is for your produce. It's the same idea, harvesting. Why do we need to say all of these? Says the Gemara the following. Right. Meaning these are special toldos. Pruning is not a main malacha, but nonetheless, you're chayav for it. All right, so don't prune your trees on Shmittah. Okay? Doraisa malacha. It's big stuff. All right?
Although I don't agree with you. I only cut things back because they overgrow. I don't cut things back to make them grow better. I cut them back because they're overgrowing and I prune them. And it's overpowering. Soon that tree will be up there and other will say, oh, it's time to cut it down.
But you do realize that by pruning it, it does make it grow better also. But that's not what you're intending. So David's asking a very good question. What happens if this is not your intention? That's what you're asking, right? It's not that you're not agreeing. You're saying, what about a guy whose intention is because it's disturbing him and he wants to cut the branches off, but he doesn't intend it to improve the condition of the tree, right? Is that also forbidden on Shmittah or not? And very interesting, the Chazon Ish comes in on this one. The Chazon Ish says that only a melacha, which is done with the intention of avodas haaretz, of working the field, of working the land, only that avodah is prohibited. But if you're doing something without any intention of working the land, of working the tree, of doing a melacha, that would not be prohibited. So that's an interesting Chazon Ish. The question is, would we rely on this for our doraisa malachos? Because this is a real doraisa here, right? This is the Chazon Ish is nice to rely on for, I don't know, washing your hands in the garden, you know, so you want to wash your hands, you might spill some water, never mind, right? You're washing your hands, you're not watering the ground. But over here, you're actually pruning the tree. Yet, says David, I don't want it to grow nicely. I just want to, what do you want? It shouldn't disturb you. Get it out of the windows. So, right. So we'll speak about this later. What happens in cases in which you need to do some kind of a labor because it's causing you damage or because it's hindering you or for some reason like that? And we'll see that is permitted, but only in Darabanan and not in Daraisa. The one thing I would say, though, is that in the case of pruning, so because the Torah only mentions, all right, it says, Karma Chaloi Tizmar. So the Rash, Ben Shimshon, he says that pruning is Daraisa only for vines. And for other trees, pruning is not Daraisa. Very interesting. And therefore, in your case, David, where it's getting in your windows or whatever, then would be permitted to do, at least relying on the Rash who says it's Daraban. And let me add, and we haven't spoken about this, but we should, there is a very important discussion about what is the status of Shmittah Bizman Hazeh, right, nowadays. Is Shmittah Bizman Hazeh Darabanan, or is it Daraisa? And the answer is it's apparently still Darabanan, but there's what to discuss. All right. And then if Shmittah is Bizman Hazeh Darabanan, then you have also some of the potential leniencies. For example, the one we're speaking about now, for David's case, you would have even on melachos that are potentially Daraisa, but nowadays they're Darabanan. All right. So bottom line, David, I think if it's getting in your way, if it's going in your windows, then it would be okay to chop down the branches. Yes. So anyway, we see in the Gemara, what does the Gemara say? These toldos, meaning these derivatives, are asur midaraisa, but other derivatives are not asur. Says the Gemara, V'hatanya, surely we learned out. I'll read it, even though I don't want to. So, you read it. What are those? What are those? What is nikush, idur, and kisuach? That's right. Nikush is weeding. Nikush is weeding, and idur is hoeing, and kisuach is mowing. Thank you. Is mowing. So all of these are labors. All right, are you allowed to mow your grass on Shmittah? Question mark. What do you think? It's an interesting question, right? Can you mow your grass on Shmittah? So we'll speak about it later. Says the Gemara, Tamad Lemar. Right, this is a question. You see, all of this is also forbidden. Very nice. Says the Gemara, all of these are still forbidden, but they're forbidden midrabanan. Okay, so you're mowing and hoeing and weeding, those are forbidden, but on a rabbinic level, not on a Torah level. All right, so far so good. So what do we have on a Torah level? Quick test. What's also on a Torah level? Sowing, excellent. Pruning, at least a vine, right? Good. What does that mean? Harvesting. Harvesting, right? So it's sowing and pruning and harvesting are also on a Torah level. The Rambam, right, very interestingly, as I mentioned before, seems to say that everything is included. But because the Gemara clearly tells us otherwise, so we have to say that the Rambam is giving a and later he'll get into the details. It's very interesting. The way the Rambam is written is very interesting. But for this reason, I've brought you the next halachos of the Rambam, and the Rambam says as follows. David, loud and clear and slow. Yes, we'll skip the Sifra. Sorry. He says they're all included, all right? But only these four melachos, right? Meaning sowing, pruning, and harvesting. Okay. Yes.
There we go.
Planting a tree is an excellent question, Isacha. What does the Rambam hold about notea, planting a tree? So from this wording of the Rambam, it's possible to say that planting a tree is included, because he says echad hakerem v'echad sharilonos, all trees are included. On the other hand, it's possible that that statement only applies to the harvesting and not to the planting. And actually, in the Rambam, you know what? I think I've brought it later. I think I've brought the discussion about planting trees later. So let's save it for a moment. But yes, very, very correct question to ask. David, yes. Makas Marda. So it sounds like it's only rabbinic. It's possible in the Rambam, and someone to argue that the Rambam holds that there's still a Torah prohibition on everything, and yet there's no Malkos, there's no Doraisa Malkos, and those are only rabbinic. But let's not get into these complications. In the Rambam, the bottom line is still very similar. You've got a basic set of labors that are Torah prohibitions, and you've got some that are rabbinic. Now, Rashi here is very interesting because Rashi puts in plowing. Okay, so far we haven't seen plowing. Plowing is a big deal. Are you allowed to dig a hole in your garden? Plowing? Well, he mentioned the pasuk says b'chodesh v'kotzeh, but over here he clearly says, and Rashi says, "V'ashish tishmetenu tanshot tishmetenu ma'aveda gemura kagon charisha v'zriya." Rashi says plowing is included, and the Ramban does not like this one bit. Right? The Ramban says, excuse me, he says, that's wrong. The Ramban says that's wrong. David, please. Beinena nachon.
So he doesn't seem to be upset about the Farisha. He's upset about the latter part of Rashi, the Netashta part.
So yeah, this is interesting. The Ramban over here, he's worried about the end of Rashi. Melizabel Kashkesh. Kashkesh. Right? The Charisha part, the Ramban accepts, but the reason why he accepts the Charisha part is because there's actually a machloket. There's actually a dispute about Charisha. The dispute comes from the next source, which we'll skip. I'm giving you lots of extra sources for your homework. But nonetheless, we'll skip it because it's a very long discussion about whether Charisha is somehow d'oraisa or not. Why would it be d'oraisa? Surely we saw that only these melachot are d'oraisa and none of the others. So why would Charisha be a d'oraisa? Right. I would say, Yisachar, that Charisha is a part of sowing, right? Zeriah will include Charisha. However, the Gemara itself brings a machlokes about this. To what degree can you include Charisha or not? And we won't get into it now. Suffice it to say that according to most poskim, Charisha is not included. Plowing is not included in the Torah prohibition. There's a big question, of course, in what the Rambam's opinion, because unlike for most halachot, in terms of Shmittah, we don't have a Shulchan Aruch, right? There's no Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Shmittah. Why not? That's not relevant, right? Who lives in Israel? Isn't this amazing? You know, to live in Israel and to look in the Shulchan Aruch and to say, hey, it wasn't relevant, so the Shulchan Aruch didn't put it in. Yes, Yisachar. Yes, he was. Well, number one, there were not many Jews growing things because I don't know how many of them owned lands. But nonetheless, the settlement in Tzfat and so on was presumably so small as to render these halachos relevant for only a very small minority of people. And in any case, I think it's wonderful to be in Eretz Israel and to have these halachos relevant, but it renders the Rambam a very dominant posek, And let's just have a look at the Rikorkus, because that's a nice source. Rikorkus, one of the late Rishonim, and he's going to speak about the Rambam. What does the Rambam hold about plowing? Okay, this is very relevant because we often dig up, holes in our garden for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes to sow seeds, and sometimes to help the land. Okay, sometimes to just make the land better. Is that a problem or not? So the Rikorkus has an interesting take on this. Let's see this, David. Yeah.
Because of the Charisha, B'Shvi is Asura min Torah.
Harisha is not excluded. Harisha stays as a Torah prohibition. All right. You know what? Let's give the rest of the source. But he wants to claim that Harisha is also mina Torah. Mina Torah. Okay. Yes.
Especially in modern with big tractors, not just a hand plowing animal. So plowing might be just to completely turn over the earth.
Right.
Not plant anything in the land.
Right.
And plowing, when you something that an animal's doing is more likely digging furrows
For sowing.
going to plant it.
So the next Rambam, which I was planning on skipping, but the Rambam mentions hachoifer, someone who digs a hole, or hachoiresh, or someone who plows, letzorech hakarka, for the sake of improving your land. You want to improve your land. And the Rambam says that's only rabbinic, says the Rambam. And from here, there are those who say, yes, that's rabbinic, but the real plowing for purposes of sowing, that is a Torah prohibition. The plowing for the sake of making your land better, that's rabbinic. You see the Rambam? He mentions, hachoresh letzorech hakarka. I'm sorry?
Zmira as well.
Zmira pruning?
We just said before.
To make things better.
Yeah.
Well, he's pruning because of his window.
No, I'm saying you may just make it better.
I'm plowing my garden to make it visually look nice. I don't care about the well-being of the soil. I just want it to look nice. If you've seen it clumps up and goes solid, I want to make it, plow it to oh, that looks nice. What have you done? Yes, I gave it a plow.
I mean, just the time necessarily do the harishas, because at the end of the day you're going to sow at the end of the day. You can say exactly the same thing with Samir as well.
What do you mean?
I'm pruning in order that I can have a better, that it can grow. Exactly. So if you want, if that's the reason.
No, I mean, pruning to make it grow is a teilada. That is zriya. That is.
I know, but it doesn't have to be zriya. I mean, it's saying.
For the sake of growing, is considered told out. But if you do it according to the Rambam for the purpose of just making the karka better, it's only Rambam, and the same thing should be true of Zmira, which you're just doing.
If you're not doing it for making the tree grow better, but rather for. Well, again, if it's for the purpose of your window, that's even better.
Granted. But even less, they were saying less than that. I want to make the garden look nice.
Right. So for purposes of making the garden look nice, which is David's question, what about turning it over to make the garden look better? Well, turning it over does make the garden look nicer, but it also does improve the soil, right? So you say, well, I don't mean to do that, but no, you know, that's a durabanan. That's a durabanan. That's a durabanan. What about, you know what? What about pruning? What about cutting your hedge? You've got a hedge, and you want to cut it into a nice shape. Is that right? You got your garden hedge. We don't have those here so much. You've got a hedge. Good for you. Are you allowed to cut your hedge into shape on Shmittah? So I think that over here it will probably be mutter to cut your hedge into shape, because you're not interested in making it grow. On the contrary, you don't want it to grow at all. That's the whole point. Rather, what do you want? You want it to look nice. So that's not for the sake of the land. It's not for the sake of the hedge. Pruning is only a malacha. Well, according to the Rash, it's only a durabanan on a hedge, and therefore, I would say that pruning to make something look nice would be permitted. Rabbi Weiss has a tshuva about pruning a hedge, and his conclusion is it's probably mutter. He doesn't actually seal it in stone, but that is definitely his inclination. Right. So that will definitely be mutter. Right. So if it's to get it out of the way for people walking, that's something which is damaging. And for the purpose of something damaging, to relieve yourself of the damage, that's certainly mutter. To make it look nice, the Rabash has got more of a suffix about that. This is, he doesn't need the Chazon Ish for this. You can bring the Chazon Ish, but you don't need it because.
Look at the Rambam now. Why would that be a problem?
Well, you've got a Durabanan prohibition.
Well, what granted, this is not a Sercha.
Right. But that's a question.
Well,
nicety. Maybe nicety is Terech Karka. Maybe. You could raise this possibility. But yes, I agree with you, Avi, that this would not be considered a Terech Karka. And then it would be mutter. And then it would be mutter. Right.
Whatever pruning you're doing.
What do you mean Sercha Karka? It sounds like Sercha Karka just means because you want to.
It makes the karka better.
Yeah, for what? For what? You make it better for what?
No, for sowing, for.
Okay, but for something that's going to
Right.
allow you to grow more.
For next year, whatever.
Exactly. But here, no, exactly. So the nicety thing, I'm not doing the nicety now to make it better for it to grow later on. So it's really nice now.
Right, but maybe nice.
Maybe
Right.
nicety is a problem.
That's it. That's
Right.
the definition. I'm saying.
Being usher,
Right.
because you're doing something for the karka. It's not the deraisa because you're not doing it for growing, but anything that you're doing in order to make your karka better in any
Yeah,
way.
but the sound of the Sercha Karka is that you're doing it in a way that you're going to make it that you are eventually going to actually use it for growing.
The other things there also are not technically necessarily for growing.
Which things?
Other things in the Rambam.
Well,
Rabbah is what is
they are. They're for enabling the.
That's what for enabling.
They're enabling the land.
Pfeffer is for enabling growth.
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, it's. Why are you digging though? What does it mean, l'tzerech karka? Digging l'tzerech karka. Well, you're digging for a reason. If you're just digging a hole, that's not a Shmittah problem. You can dig a hole. You go to the the beach again, hole in the sand. That's not.
That's tough to do because then you're
sand is not the karka. Right.
Exactly. That would be. That would be exactly that.
Right, but the thing is, anytime you plow the land, then you are improving the land. You're improving it. Right. Not a matter of making it look nice.
No,
Because looking nice is not an improvement in terms of, it's not a functional improvement. Well, this is the question of mowing the lawn. Are you allowed to mow the lawn?
It's part of my avoda of making the land.
So I'll tell you the question of mowing the lawn. The question of mowing the lawn is as follows. As we'll discuss, not this week, but we'll discuss that malachos that are done to prevent damage to your field, to your crop, to your trees, not your crop, to your trees or to your land, that's mutter on Shmittah, if it's derabanan malachos, okay? Things that are derabanan are mutter to do if they're to prevent damage. Now, mowing the lawn, right? If you leave your lawn like really long, that can damage your grass. It can damage the seeds or whatever it is. So, are you allowed to mow the lawn in order to maintain the grass or not? Because this is a derabanan melacha, right? Like we saw, right? This is called kisuach, also not in Hebrew, right? Lekaser et hadeshe, right? Is it permitted to mow the lawn in order to preserve it? And on this, if I remember correctly, Rabasha says, well, you are preserving it, but it's also improving it, because when you mow the lawn, you expose the roots to the sunlight, and it makes it better. And you know, this isn't preservation; it's really improvement. And therefore, he's worried about mowing the lawn. He's more worried about mowing your lawn than about trimming your hedge, because trimming your hedge, you're not improving the hedge. you're just making it look nice. That's not improving the hedge. But mowing the lawn, you're improving your grass. So yes, you're also making it look nice, but that's not all you're doing. You're also improving it. So weeding would be permitted. Weeding would be permitted in order to prevent damage, absolutely. But leaving it long is right. It won't cause it real damage, I agree. And it won't look nice. But Rabasha is worried about that because it's not just making it look nice, it's also improving it. Weeding is preventing damage. If it's going to be damaged, then the fact that it's improving it, we're not worried about. If it's actually going to be damaged. Right. So presumably the assumption is that long grass doesn't really damage the grass. I wonder if that's true. That is worth checking out. But presume the assumption is that leaving grass long doesn't really damage the grass. You're doing it to make it look nice. But then making it look nice is a problem because you're also improving it. Right. But on your hedge, you're okay because you're only making it look nice and you're not improving your hedge.
So the Gemara said that.
Yes.
So that's weeding that's there to improve something?
Yes.
So there is a chiluk in weeding?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Weeding to improve is asur. Weeding to prevent damage is mutter. Yes. Correct.
Agree.
Right.
Yeah, but say because the whole statement.
Right. Absolutely. Now the next Rambam speaks about Rav Yisachar's question, which is about planting trees. What about planting trees? Is that doraisa or not? I don't know. Do we want to get into this or shall we skip these? This is the question of notea, right? We saw that zorea is a Torah prohibition.
I mean, the Rambam says.
The Rambam says what?
What's referring to? He says
Planting trees.
Okay, fine.
Looks like it's Rabbanon. However, Rav Moshe is bothered by this.
But the end of what is putting things? How are you deciding when it comes to the right category or not? Just because the process is clear on Sofra and Kamafa, that's what it is. Just literally those things with the derisas. So anything else is not soda, not the vineyard. So like my pomegranates.
Pomegranate is a tree.
I was saying anything else,
right?
Strawberries, for example. That would be
strawberries.
Yeah, I'm saying
yeah. The strawberry fields forever.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Exactly. There you go. Your best.
They're not grown. Strawberries aren't grown in the ground. They're grown up in pot, bigger, like pot things.
You're the music man. You're the music man. That's why.
Aye.
Then the strawberries in that situation, they'll be looking better.
Oh, yeah.
What we're talking about?
Yes, strawberries are Rabbanan. Strawberries are not produced according to the Rambam. However, look at Rav Moshe. Look at Rav Moshe at the end, and this goes back to the first Rambam. You remember that he seems to say that everything is deraisa. Are you heading out? David, good night. Good to see ya. So Rav Moshe is bothered by this, and to cut a long story short, Rav Moshe, you want to read it? Okay, read Rav Moshe. Why not? Let's read Rav Moshe.
What is the assay of Shosh? Just one of the again, as in like Shosh.
Yes, Meshafsa haaretz Shabbos lasha, and the Rambam seems to imply that applies to everything, in every labor. So how can this all be rabbinic if that applies to everything? That's what the Rav Moshe asks. A lav, it doesn't have a proper lav. You don't get malchus for it. But le'eser, Isser I say.
The Rak told us on the Gemara, the Humid Rabbanon, Mishrum, Halimud, the Nichtav, Zmira, Afshu, because we are Shalav, how you gam loikim, to call Tolada. She yelled me av, gam the Chiv Skila, Mishum have a av mamish. Okay, so says Rav Moshe, we learn out a special limud, special derivation from the pasuk that there are some things that are rabbinic, but whatever we're not learning out specifically from pasuk that's rabbinic remains daraisa, and therefore says Rav Moshe that notea is daraisa. Planting a tree, says Rav Moshe, would be a daraisa prohibition, but not the lav, Only it is Raseh, and that's why you get makas mardos
because you can't give you proper Malchus. You only got Malchus Marriage. But you understand this is a bit right, which is interesting, right? You see that this gets a bit complicated. All right. Oh, all right. So I just wanted to mention this very interesting question based on the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Lamed Vav. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? This is Orach Chaim, Shin Lamed Vav. Who remembers this? Whoever doesn't can just read it. David, yes. You have to walk on grass on Shabbat, in case you were worried about it. Aval. If you go to eat in your gardens, yes. So what about to have your air conditioner unit dripping into your garden? Can you wash your hands on your Shmittah garden? Are you allowed to eat during Shmittah in the garden where you'll be spilling your orange juice and potentially watering your garden? Yes, Avi.
There was just this, the connection between Shabbos and Shmittah, obviously, we started last week. But to go make that full connection we're making here is where just
is a stretch. Why do you think it's a stretch?
Well, I mean, obviously the Rambam has something like for the
Oh well, he applies.
Still to go to that, it's still a stretch. Go and stop him to say to the She'enos come and all that. So there's still to make that. It's a big
I agree with you. It's a big stretch, but you have to explain a bit more why. But you're right. It is a stretch. So first of all, let's not forget. These are watering. Is watering a malacha d'oraisa? No. What about on Shabbos? On Shabbos it is. So that's a big distinction, right? On Shabbos, you have to be careful not to water your plants because it's a d'oraisa. On Shmittah, it's rabbinic. And nowadays, it's a double rabbinic. Now, it's true that the Magen Avram, as we know, what's the halacha of a psik reisha in a d'Rabbanan? Okay, psik reisha means you're doing something, but something else is definitely going to happen as a result of it, right? Psik reisha. So, Trumas Hadeshin says it's mutter. The Magen Avram says it's aser. This is in Siman Shin Yud Daled. Magen Avram Shin Yud Daled famously says psik reisha d'Rabbanan is aser. Well, the Magen Avram famously prohibits because it's an annoying prohibition. All right, because otherwise, yes, annoying. It's not nice to say annoying about Magen Avram. Oh, and over here, it's two Rabbanans. And then psik reisha, if it's loy nichele, does not apply. Over here, it's a double d'Rabbanan. Call it a malacha d'Rabbanan. And it's also Shmittah nowadays, if we assume it's d'Rabbanan, is an extra d'Rabbanan. And it's also psik reisha that you're not interested, even though the concept of psik reisha de l'nichele is potentially only a Shabbat concept because of meleches machsheves. It doesn't apply to other malachas. That's a whole other diyun. So on Shmittah, so what do we have on Shmittah? We have a psik reisha on two d'Rabbanans. Is this going to be a problem or not? So first of all, over here, we can add our Chazon Ish. You remember the old Chazon Ish that we mentioned at the beginning? Chazon Ish says that if you're not doing this for the purpose of working on the land, then this is not a Shmittah prohibition. And therefore, we can definitely add the Chazon Ish for cases in which you're just washing your hands, turning on your air conditioning unit, and so on. You're not actively trying to work the land. I would add something to that also. And what I would add is, on Shabbos, okay, watering the land, you have a d'oraisa problem. On Shmittah, like, watering the land is only a problem if it's actually going to be watering the land, helping the land. Often, you're doing the Tilas Yadayim in some area of your garden. It's not going to do anything much, meaning you're not actually helping. It's not watering. Where does your water from the air conditioner unit go? To some forgotten area of your garden. This is not watering your garden. You're not doing something positive in terms of making your garden grow. This is not considered something positive in terms of a melacha on the karka. Yes, David.
It's badly soiled. The water is pretty dirty.
It does, because the water is dirty. And the same would apply. Right. The same would apply for your sponge water. Your sponge water, come on, this is not watering the garden. Your air conditioner is also a grama, so I wouldn't worry about it. But generally speaking, I do not think that one needs to be machmir about washing your hands and about eating in a garden, even though for Shabbos purposes, we are machmir about it. But look at the Ramah. Meraglam, which is not effective for planting, and certainly for eating outside. The whole Ramah is tov lahachmir, not to eat outside. There's no tov lahachmir for Shmittah, that's for sure. And for watering, I would say don't water your favorite roses. Don't wash your hands over your favorite roses in order to make them more beautiful. Wash your hands over a less significant area of your back garden. And then we'll be all right. All right, the next sources get into the question of what's considered pseudo, what's considered to save from damages, and what's considered to be improving. Let's leave that for next week, Amir Hashem. It's a whole big disc for next week. It's already getting late, and I'm also unwell, so I need to get to bed. So, thank you, Amir.